When Emma and David first moved into Willow Creek, they thought they had finally found the place they would call home forever. The tree-lined streets, the sound of children playing in the cul-de-sacs, and the promise of a safe neighborhood felt like a dream come true. For years, they had worked hard, Emma balancing her career in education while raising their daughter, and David managing long shifts at the hospital. Buying a home here had been a milestone they had both cherished. But soon after they unpacked their boxes and settled into daily routines, the letters started arriving. At first, they seemed harmless, a notice about trimming hedges, a reminder about garbage cans left outside too long. David shrugged it off, and Emma laughed nervously, believing these were just little adjustments. After all, wasn't that what a homeowners association was supposed to do? Keep everything neat and tidy? It didn't take long, however, for the reminders to turn into warnings and the warnings into fines. The HOA, led by a rigid president named Mrs. Porter, seemed to have singled them out. Emma noticed that while other neighbors left their kids' bikes out overnight or parked in front of their lawns, it was only their house that received violations. One evening, Emma held a letter in her trembling hands. It accused them of disturbing the neighborhood harmony because they had hosted a small family barbecue in their backyard. Disturbing? Emma whispered. We were just celebrating Lily's birthday. Tears welled up in her eyes as David tried to calm her. He could see the toll it was taking on her. But the most painful blow came when the HOA started turning their neighbors against them. Mrs. Porter, with her sharp tone and endless meetings, hinted that Emma and David were not fit for the community's standards. Suddenly, neighbors who once smiled politely stopped waving. Children who had played with Lily were told not to spend time at her house. It was as if a silent wall had risen between them and everyone else. David felt the strain more than ever. Long shifts at work were already exhausting, but now he came home to find Emma anxious, their daughter confused by whispers at school, and their once welcoming neighborhood growing colder by the day. They're trying to push us out, David muttered one night, slamming the latest $250 fine notice onto the kitchen table. And they won't stop until we leave. Emma, though weary, refused to give in. This is our home, David. We bought it together. We promised Lily stability, a safe place. I'm not going to let them bully us out. Her voice shook, but there was a fire in her eyes he hadn't seen before. The tension escalated further when the HOA accused them of property neglect, their crime, planting wildflowers along the side of their home. Emma had chosen them because Lily loved watching butterflies. But the board claimed the flowers were unsightly and issued a $500 fine. That night, as Emma dug through their savings to cover bills and groceries, David sat in silence. He could see how hard she was fighting to stay strong, but the weight was too heavy for one person to carry. And then came the cruelest moment of all. During a heated HOA meeting, Mrs. Porter hinted that maybe the stress of constant violations was a sign Emma and David weren't a good match for the community, or even for each other. Neighbors whispered, casting glances at them as though their marriage itself was somehow the problem. Emma's face burned with humiliation, while David clenched his fists under the table. That night, sitting together in their dimly lit living room, silence stretched between them. Both were exhausted, both hurt, both feeling the invisible walls closing in. But beneath the silence, a decision was forming. Emma looked at David and finally said, "They want to tear us apart, but maybe we fight back. Not with anger, not with running away, but together." David studied her face, the strength in her tired eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than defeat, hope. "Together," he repeated softly. "We don't let them win, not this time." It was the beginning of a shift neither the HOA nor the neighborhood could have predicted. Emma and David weren't going to break. They weren't going to give up. Instead, they were about to turn the very system used against them into the foundation of their greatest fight. And in that moment, As the night settled quietly outside, a plan, fragile but growing, began to take root. The next morning, Emma woke with a sense of determination she hadn't felt in months. The cruel words from the HOA meeting still stung, but they had ignited something inside her. She poured coffee for David, who sat quietly at the table, scanning through yet another letter demanding payment. "They think we're weak," Emma said firmly, "but what if we show them that we're stronger together than they ever imagined?" David looked at her, weary but intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Emma explained her idea. Instead of fighting the HOA alone, they would start by connecting with other neighbors who had quietly suffered under the same heavy hand. She had noticed the frustration on people's faces, the way they avoided speaking up at meetings for fear of being targeted. "We're not the only ones," she insisted. "They've been silenced just like us. If we can bring them together, maybe we can turn this around." That evening, Emma baked a batch of cookies and suggested they take Lily along as they knocked on a few doors. To their surprise, the neighbors opened up more quickly than they expected. An elderly couple revealed they had been fined for painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue. A young single mother admitted she had nearly lost her job after repeated letters about her unapproved work vehicle. Another family confessed they were considering moving because of constant harassment over their lawn. By the end of the night, Emma and David realized what they had suspected all along. The HOA wasn't protecting the community. It was controlling it. "We've all been suffering in silence," the elderly woman whispered. "But maybe it's time we do something about it." Encouraged, Emma and David organized a small gathering at their home the following week. To their astonishment, more than a dozen families showed up. Some arrived nervously, glancing over their shoulders as if afraid of being caught. But as the night went on, the living room buzzed with voices, stories of unfair treatment, ridiculous fines, and humiliation. David stood and addressed the group. "They've tried to divide us. They've made us feel alone, like it's just our problem. But tonight proves it's not just us. They tried to tear us apart. But maybe, just maybe, they gave us the chance to come together." The room erupted with applause. For the first time in months, Emma felt hope spreading, not just inside her, but across the faces of her neighbors. The next step was risky. They would need to attend the upcoming HOA meeting as a united front. Normally, only a handful of homeowners showed up, leaving Mrs. Porter and her allies free to dictate rules without challenge. But this time would be different. The night of the meeting, the usually half-empty community hall was packed wall to wall. Emma and David sat side by side, Lily at home with a neighbor, while the families they had spoken with filled the room. Murmurs of anticipation filled the air as Mrs. Porter stepped up to the podium, her usual confident smile faltering when she saw the crowd. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice tighter than usual. "Let's begin with violations and fines." Before she could finish, David raised his hand. "I'd like to speak." Gasps filled the room. Few had ever dared interrupt the board. Mrs. Porter glared, but the weight of so many watching eyes forced her to relent. "Very well, go ahead." David rose, his voice steady. "For months, my family has been fined, harassed, and humiliated. We've been told we don't belong here, but we are not the only ones. This room is full of people who have been treated the same way. Enough is enough. We are not enemies. We are neighbors, and we will no longer stand for being bullied." Applause broke out, stronger and louder than anyone expected. Emma watched as the faces of fear she had seen before transformed into expressions of courage. One by one, other residents stood to share their experiences. Stories poured out, some heartbreaking, others infuriating, and each one painted the same picture: a community controlled by fear, not unity. Mrs. Porter tried to regain control, slamming her gavel and shouting for order. But the tide had turned. The room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the people who had finally found their voice. By the end of the meeting, Emma and David had not only challenged the HOA, they had sparked a movement. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now exchanged phone numbers, made plans, and promised to stand together. As the crowd dispersed, Emma squeezed David's hand. "We did it," she whispered. David shook his head, smiling for the first time in weeks. "No, Emma, we started it. The real fight is just beginning." And as they walked home under the glow of the streetlights, they knew the days of silence were over. What had begun as a nightmare was transforming into something bigger than they could have imagined, a fight for their home, their family, and their entire neighborhood. The weeks that followed the explosive HOA meeting felt like a turning point in Willow Creek. For years, the community had lived in quiet fear of fines and threats. Now, for the first time, the residents were beginning to see each other not as strangers, but as allies. Emma and David became the bridge that brought them together. Late nights were spent around kitchen tables, drafting petitions and reviewing bylaws. The neighbors who had once kept their heads down now offered their skills freely. An accountant helped comb through HOA financial records. A retired attorney explained the community's legal rights. Even the young mother who had nearly lost her job volunteered to design flyers. It felt less like rebellion and more like a family rebuilding itself. Emma marveled at the change. She had once felt alone, isolated, and powerless. Now she stood at the heart of a growing movement. One evening, as she set out cups of tea for the group, she caught David's eye across the room. He was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months as he helped neighbors draw up plans. For Emma, it was proof that the HOA hadn't torn them apart. If anything, it had made them stronger. The real test came with the next HOA election. Normally, the board members won uncontested, reappointing themselves year after year. But this time was different. With encouragement from her neighbors, Emma agreed to run for a seat, while David volunteered to help organize voter turnout. They didn't campaign with threats or intimidation. Instead, they knocked on doors, shared stories, and reminded people what community truly meant. Election night arrived, and the community hall buzzed with energy. Mrs. Porter and her allies sat stiffly at the front, clearly unsettled by the unusually large turnout. One by one, ballots were cast. When the results were announced, gasps filled the room. Emma had not only won, she had received more votes than any candidate in recent memory. Several other reform-minded neighbors also secured seats, shifting the balance of power on the board for the first time in decades. Mrs. Porter's face turned pale, her once commanding presence deflated. She tried to speak, but the applause drowned her out. People weren't cheering for Emma alone. They were cheering for change. The weeks after the election transformed Willow Creek. The absurd fines stopped. Instead of threatening letters, homeowners received newsletters about upcoming block parties and community cleanups. Rules were simplified, applied fairly, and discussed openly before being passed. Families who had once felt unwelcome now joined in neighborhood events, and children's laughter filled the streets without fear of violations. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma and David sat together on their porch. Lily played nearby, decorating the wildflowers that had once sparked a $500 fine. Neighbors strolled past, waving and smiling warmly, some even stopping to chat. "Do you remember when we thought this place was going to break us?" David asked quietly. Emma smiled softly, her eyes fixed on their daughter. "I remember, but look at us now. Look at what we built, together." David leaned back, taking in the glow of porch lights flickering across the street, a symbol of a community finally at peace. "They tried to tear us apart," he said, his voice steady with pride. "But instead they brought us closer, to each other, and to everyone here." Emma nodded. "This neighborhood isn't perfect, but it's ours, and now it feels like home again." As twilight settled in, the couple held hands, surrounded by the laughter of their child and the warmth of their neighbors. The battle had been long, exhausting, and painful, but it had given them something stronger than they ever imagined, a united community and a deeper bond with each other. The HOA had once been a symbol of division and fear. Now, under new leadership, it had become a reminder of resilience, unity, and the power of standing together. And for Emma and David, it was proof that no matter how hard life tried to break them, love, courage, and unity would always be stronger.